What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be talking about one of my favorite things and favorite aspects when it comes to custom shoes. We're going to be talking about some anime style art. And for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, my name is Dillon from DeJesus Custom Footwear. We run a YouTube page that is almost dedicated entirely to what goes on here at DCF, whether that be showing you guys some behind the scenes look at what we do and spreading a ton of knowledge through tutorials and just what our process is like for creating all of these custom sneakers. And one of the first videos that we put up here on YouTube was also a Dragon Ball Z custom where we did a Shenron Dragon on a pair of the Yeezy 350 V2s, so it feels really good to be back creating another video based around Dragon Ball Z. So today we're going to be creating a pair of Nike slides based around the Dragon Ball Z characters Gohan and Cell. And for those of you that are real DBZ fans, you guys might remember some of the epic battles that Gohan and Cell had, so it's super fitting to go ahead and place those two on a pair of slides. So one of the questions that we've realized has been popping up a lot more recently is if we can go over how you create skin tones with paint. And although a lot of people might be referring to how do you do that if you're painting realism within humans or whatnot, a lot of the same color theory and principles that we'll be covering in today's video also apply to anime or cartoon style human-ass characters. So the way that most of the comics you know and love are created is, first off, the artist will just do a simple black and white drawing. Once they have that finalized, they then pass off that drawing into a person who is called a flatter. And what a flatter does is all the color work within the black and white drawing within all of the line work. So the way that we're actually going to go about painting this is a little bit vice versa. We're going to lay down all of our colors first, then do the job of the flatter, creating the highlights and shadows on top of the color, and then do all of our line work last. So we're also going to be giving you some of our recommendations and tips and tricks for doing the line work later in this video, but without further ado, let's go ahead and walk you through the early stages of making a pair of slides like this. So just like we would handle any of our other prep work, I like to kick things off by sanding the slides, along with doing some acetoning with the Scotch pad, and then cleaning everything up with a cotton ball. So then when I was creating the background for these, I kind of wanted to go for a little bit of feel of these matching the Cell Games background. So it's just very simple, where we just have a blue to green gradient, basically a ground level and a sky level, a simple gradient with a couple textures mixed in, just to give it that feel that these characters are in a similar style scenery that you might have actually seen them in Dragon Ball Z. And after we have our background completed, this is where I'll create a stencil for each of the characters. And before we get into any of our paintwork on these characters, we're going to go ahead and take a listen to what past Dillon has to say when he was painting these a couple days ago. So skin tones can be pretty tricky, but since we're working with kind of like a comic style art, one little trick that I like to do in Photoshop or just kind of with digital art in general before we even get into any of our color mixing is to try to really identify the exact color we're working with. So I'm just going to show you a quick trick on Photoshop that you can use the color picker and see the exact color we're going to be using. So let's go ahead on over here. Okay, so there's this tool over here in Photoshop known as the color picker tool, or it's actually called the eyedropper tool. So we're going to go ahead, place that over the main color that we're going to be trying to capture, and you get this nice kind of like a shell pink is what I'm going to call it. If you come down here, now we can kind of see it up against some other colors and some colors that it's going to be within the same family of. So since you could see over on the right side of our gradient scale, it's in the same color family as orange. It's not going to be in the same color family as like red or pink. So one more time, eyedropper tool. Now we can kind of see the exact color that we're going for. And now I have a real good idea when we get over into our color mixing and we start mixing some colors. I know that these are the colors within the same family that I'm going to be shooting for, something along the lines of like oranges. I know Angelus has like some nice Georgia peaches, something like that mixed in with white. So I'm going to kick things off starting with just some white. So right away, like I said, I know that Angelus Georgia Peach kind of has a nice little orange tint to it. So I'm going to mix that in with our white and we'll see where we're at. Now already this mix is something probably like 9 parts white, 1 part Georgia Peach, just so you guys can kind of start to get an understanding of really, I always start skin tones typically with white and then kind of mix in some different tints to it, whether that be pink or orange or beige. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to mix in actually a little bit more white. It's a little bit too orange for my liking. And then I'm also going to mix in just a tad bit of some shell pink. And I'm super happy with how that came out. So now these are 2-ounce cups. From almost any project, I recommend that you always make a little bit too much extra paint, because something like this, after we lay this down as our base color for the skin, we're gonna then mix it into 2 separate parts for our highlights and our shadows. So you definitely want to make sure that you have enough paint. So my main goal for using a stencil like this is just to nail down the main color placement within the character. So if we take Gohan, for example, he has 3 main colors: his hair, his skin, and his shirt. So all I'm really trying to lay down is those main colors exactly where they need to go, and then by hand later we're going to lay down all of the highlights and shadows within each of those colors. Now this absolutely can be done by hand. You could draw this all out and then paint each of the colors. This is just my typical workflow of using stencils to just lay down basic shapes, and I do a lot of airbrushing more so than doing any hand painting. And so after we have our main colors laid down, we're going to go ahead and take another listen to past Dillon and what he has to say about creating highlights and shadows for each of your main colors. So we have our 3 main colors that we use to create Gohan. So what I'm gonna do is break down each of those colors into 2 separate cups, one being for the highlights and one being for the shadows. Now, in order to create the highlights, all we're gonna do is mix in some Angelus white. And right off the bat, I'm gonna say we want a little bit less than a 1-to-1 ratio. So I'm gonna say probably closer to 30-70, where you're using 70% main color, 30% white mixed in order to create some nice highlights. Now we're going to mix each of those up. So now in order to create our shadows, we're going to do kind of the same process, except you can't really just go and add the opposite of white. You can't just go and add black into each of the colors in order to create shadows, and the reason for that is because it'll tend to make them really muddy. So this is where you're gonna kind of need a little bit of experience in playing with different things in order to create that perfect tone you want for shadows. So for something like pinks, you know, I'm gonna mix in something like beige to create a darker skin tone. With the yellows to create that darker hair, maybe I'll mix in a little bit of orange, or maybe even just a darker yellow. And same thing with the purple. That's where you might be able to mix in just a little bit of black to create a nice shadow with that purple, but that's because the purple itself is a much darker color. I would never really mix black into something like a light yellow, a light pink, you know, light orange or something like that. You're just going to really muddy up the colors. So for our purple, like I said, I'm just going to mix in a couple drops of black. You really don't need a lot of black or the darker colors, because just a little bit goes a long way with these. For the yellow, I'm going to mix in a little bit of a darker yellow, and then I'm going to throw in a couple drops of brown also. And then to create our darker skin tone, I'm just going to mix in some darker beige and one tiny little drop of the brown. Now let's go ahead and mix all those up. Now is where you can kind of look across at all of the colors. You should be seeing 3 different shades of purple, 3 different shades of yellow, and 3 different shades of our nice light shell pink skin tone color. And if you're not happy with any of the colors, all you need to do is mix in just a little bit more, whether you want to go a little bit lighter with any of your highlights. I think I'm going to add a little bit more white into my yellow to make that light yellow even a little bit lighter. And then for my purple, I'm actually going to mix in definitely some more black into there just to create an even darker shadow within that purple. But other than that, I'm happy with a lot of the colors. Along with my dark yellow, I know I'm going to mix in a little bit more orange just based off of knowing how I want that Super Saiyan hair to actually look. So now that we have our wide range of tones ready, our highlights and our shadows, it's time to actually get into placing these down within our character. And since we're using some reference material of a comic that's already made, we know exactly where all these highlights and shadows are going to go. But if you were creating your own original artwork, that's where you would need some kind of light theory on where you were going to place your highlights and shadows. That's for another video, possibly in the future. But since we're just using already created stuff, we know where exactly we're going to be placing all of these, which makes our job super simple. And so there's a lot of different tools that you can use for placing these highlights and shadows. Angelus has an absolutely phenomenal wide range of options for super tiny detail brushes, but I kind of have my own technique that I've just been using for years, and I use a toothpick to do all this kind of stuff. It may sound, a little weird or out there, but go ahead and give it a try if you feel that you haven't been that successful with detail brushes. What's funny is the way that this came about for me is I had a lot of cheap brushes when I was just starting out, so they would get frayed super easily. So none of my detail brushes were lasting, they were frayed, so it seemed like I wasn't able to pull any tight detailed lines. So I said, you know what, let me give a toothpick a shot, because that's not gonna fray. I can get that super pointy and sharp at the end, and I know what I'll be working with there. So it was just a random concept that I gave a try to years ago, and it's kind of stuck ever since. I still use it today, and that's what I do for all of my highlights and shadows, but feel free to use any of the excellent options that Angelus offers with their great detail brushes. And so one question that you guys might have is if you need to do multiple coats of the highlights and shadows. I think that you can totally get the job done with the first go around, where the colors will be solid enough that you don't need to go around and do a second or third coat on top of them. And so after we have all of our colors laid down, our highlights and shadows, everything's looking good, it's time to get into my favorite part of this whole thing, outlining everything in black. And so this is definitely the most tedious part that you need to absolutely take your time with. Make sure you're doing some breathing techniques that you can pull some long, tight, detailed lines. And this is where you're really gonna see your whole project come together as a whole. All right, so that felt good to be back on this side of the camera giving another tutorial. I know it's been a while. We've been putting out a ton of cleat videos, and a lot of you guys have been wondering and asking when our next tutorial was gonna be. So this is one that was long overdue, and one that we've been wanting to do for quite a while, and covering one of our favorite topics with anime style artwork. So we hope that you guys were able to take away a few techniques along with some tips and tricks from today's video, and we would love to see your guys' results from some of the topics that we covered in today's video. Jason and I are kind of constantly blown away with a lot of the stuff that you guys send in and say this is only your first or second shoe that you've ever done, and it already looks like some stuff that took me a year or two to really get into. So tremendous job. I love seeing the stuff that you guys do, and you say that, you know, you watched our videos and you learned from them, so that feels awesome for us. That's why we do it, so keep sending us that stuff, guys. We really appreciate it. So if you aren't already, make sure you're subscribed to the page to make sure you don't miss out on any of our future tutorials. Go ahead and give this video a like if you haven't already. It greatly helps the channel grow more than you guys know, so we really appreciate that. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you in that next video.